Lady Serena already handled it. The sentence followed Serena Vale through nearly every corridor of the royal palace. At first, she used to feel proud hearing it. Now, it only made her tired. Servants repeated it daily while rushing through crowded halls, carrying reports and treaty scrolls. The southern delegates arrived early. Lady Serena already prepared their chambers. The Alpha King's War Council moved to midday. She reorganized the schedules this morning. The border soldiers need medical visits. She's already there. Everything eventually became connected to her, and somehow, that also made her invisible. Serena moved quietly through the palace library, balancing stacks of royal documents against her chest, while servants rushed around her in controlled chaos. No one noticed she hadn't slept properly in days. No one noticed she skipped meals constantly. No one noticed the exhaustion beneath her calm smile, because Serena always managed everything before problems became visible, especially for him. Alpha King Kaelor, Vyre stood at the center of almost every thought she carried, not because he demanded it, because loving him became routine long before she realized how dangerous that was. It happened slowly, over years. Late-night strategy meetings where he trusted her judgment first. Winter campaigns where she stayed awake, organizing medicine for wounded soldiers beside him. Quiet conversations after council disasters, when Kaelor only relaxed once everyone else left the room. Serena learned the shape of his silence before anyone else did. And somewhere during those years, she fell in love with him completely, quietly, without expectation. That was her first mistake. Lady Serena, she looked up immediately. A young servant approached nervously, holding several sealed documents. The king requested the Western Treaty reports. Already finished, Serena answered gently, accepting the papers. I'll bring them myself. The servant smiled with obvious relief. Of course, she would handle it. Serena always handled everything. The realization felt heavier tonight for some reason. By evening, rain hammered softly against palace windows, while council meetings stretched later than usual. Serena approached Kaelor's private council room, carrying the finalized treaty documents against her chest. Then, she heard laughter inside. She stopped automatically. You rely on her too much, a councilman's voice. Another laughed lightly. She'd probably follow you into war without hesitation. Serena's fingers tightened slightly around the documents. Inside the room, Kaelor answered casually while signing papers. She's loyal, that's all. Something inside her went painfully quiet. The men continued speaking. And if she ever leaves, Kaelor didn't even pause. She won't. Silence. Then came the sentence that shattered something permanent. She's been beside me for years. People like Serena don't walk away. The room laughed softly afterward. But Serena heard almost none of it, because suddenly she understood the cruelest part about loving someone silently. Eventually, they stop seeing your love as a choice. It becomes expectation, convenience, something permanent enough to stop valuing. Rain continued, tapping softly against the palace windows, while Serena stood motionless outside the council room. For years, she gave Kaelor loyalty without limits, and somewhere along the way, he started believing it cost her nothing. Serena lowered her eyes briefly toward the treaty documents, still resting in her hands, then quietly turned around and walked away down the empty corridor. For the first time in years, she didn't enter the room when he called for her. And somehow, Kaelor never even noticed she'd been there. By dawn, Serena Vale's chambers looked almost untouched, which somehow made her leaving feel even sadder. No shattered furniture, no angry letters, No dramatic goodbye left behind for the Alpha King to discover later. Just absence, quiet and deliberate. Serena folded the last dress carefully into a traveling bag, while pale morning light slipped through the curtains. The palace beyond her windows had already started waking. Servants preparing breakfast trays, guards changing shifts, council aides rushing through, corridors carrying reports she normally organized hours earlier. Today, someone else could do it. A soft knock came at her chamber door. "Enter." One of the younger palace maids stepped inside carrying fresh linens, then froze immediately. "My lady, are you traveling?" Serena glanced toward the packed bags beside the bed. "Yes." The maid blinked uncertainly. "For how long?" A long silence followed, because Serena realized she genuinely didn't know. "For as long as I need." The maid's expression shifted slowly into concern. "My lady, should I inform the king?" Serena's fingers paused briefly against the leather straps of her bag. For years, she would have said yes immediately. Kaelor always came first. His schedule, his needs, his kingdom. But standing inside the quiet room now, Serena finally understood something painful. She had spent years making herself endlessly available to a man who never once feared losing her. "No," she answered softly. "Don't disturb him." The maid looked startled, because everyone disturbed the Alpha King for Serena, always. The maid hesitated again before speaking carefully. "You don't sound like you're coming back soon." Serena smiled faintly. "That's because I'm finally leaving for myself, instead of returning for someone else." The words felt strange, unfamiliar, but also freeing. An hour later, Serena walked alone through the palace corridors, carrying only one travel bag and a cloak folded tightly around her shoulders. No royal escort followed her. No guards questioned her departure. Why would they? Serena handled palace matters constantly. Travel arrangements weren't unusual. No one realized this time was different. Not until later. She stopped briefly outside Kaelor's private office before leaving entirely. The hallway stood empty in the quiet morning light. Serena reached slowly into her pocket and removed a thin silver ribbon. The bond ribbon Kaelor tied around her wrist years ago during a winter victory celebration. Back then, she foolishly believed it meant something deeper. Now, it simply looked like proof of how long she'd waited for someone to notice her devotion willingly. Serena entered the office quietly. Kaelor wasn't there yet. His unfinished reports still covered the large council desk, exactly where he left them last night. Serena placed the ribbon neatly beside the documents, then added several organized resignation letters underneath it. Royal scheduling, political correspondence, military oversight. Every responsibility she quietly carried for years. Finished, done. The palace would survive without her eventually. Kaelor would too. That realization hurt more than expected, but not enough to stay anymore. By midday, the first signs of disaster finally appeared. A servant discovered untouched council reports. Another noticed Serena's office emptied completely. Then someone found the resignation letters. The palace erupted almost instantly. She resigned. All positions? Without warning? Kaelor barely reacted at first when informed. "She's probably visiting the southern estates." The servant, standing before his desk, swallowed nervously. "My king." Lady Serena officially resigned from every royal responsibility before leaving. Silence settled heavily across the room. Kaelor slowly looked up from his documents. For the first time that day, something uncertain crossed his expression. "Resigned?" he repeated quietly. The servant nodded once. "Yes, Your Majesty." And suddenly, The Alpha King realized Serena hadn't stepped away temporarily. She had chosen to leave completely. The palace began falling apart quietly. At first, the problems looked small. A delayed council schedule, missing diplomatic records, 2 overlapping military meetings accidentally assigned to the same war chamber, minor inconveniences, things Kaelor barely noticed during the first day after Serena's departure. Then the second day arrived, and suddenly, everything started collapsing at once. Why are the Eastern delegates waiting outside? Kaelor looked up sharply from the war table. A nervous servant froze near the doorway. They arrived this morning, Your Majesty. And silence. Then carefully, Lady Serena usually handled formal diplomatic. Greetings personally. The room went still. Kaelor frowned immediately. She never mentioned that. The servant lowered his eyes. She handled many things without troubling you, my king. That answer irritated him more than it should have. Kaelor dismissed the servant sharply before turning back toward the unfinished military reports covering the table, only to realize half the paperwork lacked final signatures, because Serena usually prepared everything beforehand. Another problem surfaced before noon. Then another. By evening, the entire palace operated like a wounded machine, missing invisible pieces nobody realized mattered until they disappeared. A councilman stormed into the war room, carrying stacks of unsigned documents. The Western trade agreements are delayed again. Kaelor rubbed exhausted fingers across his forehead. Fix it. We can't. Why not? The councilman hesitated. Because Lady Serena negotiated most of the informal arrangements personally. Silence. Kaelor's expression hardened. What informal arrangements? Another uncomfortable pause. The compromises nobles accepted because they trusted her. That landed strangely hard. Not because the information surprised him, because he realized how much influence Serena carried quietly, without ever demanding recognition for it. Kaelor stood abruptly from the table. Find the agreements. We tried. The councilman swallowed carefully. She memorized most of them, instead of documenting every conversation. The room fell silent again. For years, Kaelor considered Serena dependable, efficient, loyal, but standing inside the increasingly chaotic palace now, he began understanding something worse. The kingdom functioned smoothly because Serena absorbed problems before they reached him, and he never once asked how exhausting that became. A servant rushed inside moments later. My king, the Southern Border Alliance is threatening withdrawal. Kaelor's patience snapped instantly. Why? The ceremonial protocols for tomorrow's negotiations weren't prepared. Kaelor stared in disbelief. That nearly destroys an alliance? The servant answered nervously. Lady Serena usually handled cultural formalities herself to prevent offense. Another silence. Another reminder. Another invisible responsibility she carried alone. By the third day, even palace staff looked overwhelmed. Servants ran through corridors, clutching incomplete schedules, while council members argued openly over missing records. Meetings started late. Military correspondence became disorganized. One noble delegation nearly left the capital insulted because nobody prepared proper reception customs. Kaelor slammed another unfinished report against his desk, hard enough to crack the wooden edge beneath it. Why was this not completed? No one answered immediately. Then, quietly, because everyone finally understood the truth, one older advisor spoke. Because Lady Serena usually completed these matters before anyone noticed they existed. The room fell completely silent afterward. Kaelor looked slowly around the war chamber. Disorder surrounded everything now. Papers stacked carelessly, unfinished schedules, missed details, confusion. And suddenly, he noticed the absence at the center of all of it. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant. Serena. For years, she moved quietly through the palace, making impossible things appear effortless. And because she never complained, everyone assumed it required nothing from her, including him. Later that night, Kaylor walked alone into Serena's abandoned office for the first time since she left. The room remained painfully organized. Every shelf labeled, every archive sorted perfectly, everything exactly where she would have left it, except her. Kaylor stood silently in the center of the empty office, while moonlight spilled softly across her abandoned desk. And for the first time since Serena disappeared, the Alpha King finally understood something terrifying. The kingdom hadn't depended on systems. It depended on her. It took Kaylor 2 weeks to find her. 2 exhausting weeks of following scattered reports across southern territories while the palace continued stumbling behind him. A woman helping fishermen repair damaged docks. A quiet healer organizing supplies. After storms, a former noblewoman working beside villagers, without guards or servants. Every rumor pointed toward the same place. A small coastal village far beyond royal territory. Kaylor arrived just before sunset. Salt wind rolled heavily through the harbor, while fishing boats drifted slowly against wooden docks beneath fading golden light. The village looked peaceful, simple, nothing like the palace Serena left behind. Then he saw her. Serena stood near the shoreline, laughing softly, while helping several fishermen unload supply crates from a small boat. Simple clothes replaced royal silks. Her hair was tied loosely back instead of pinned perfectly into court styles. And, for the first time in years, she looked relaxed, not exhausted, not overwhelmed, happy. The realization hit Kaylor harder than expected, because suddenly he understood something terrifying immediately. Serena looked lighter without him. One older fisherman grinned while handing her another crate. "You work harder than half these boys." Serena laughed quietly. "That's because they complain more than I do." The men around her laughed easily afterward, comfortably, like they genuinely enjoyed her presence instead of relying on it silently. Kaylor stood motionless near the harbor entrance, watching the scene unfold, and something uncomfortable tightened inside his chest. Not jealousy, worse, regret, because he couldn't remember the last time he made Serena laugh like that. Eventually, her gaze lifted toward the harbor path, then stopped. The smile faded slowly from her face once she noticed him standing there. Not fear, not excitement, recognition. "You found me." Kaylor stepped closer, carefully, through the crowded docks. "You left." Serena folded her arms lightly. "Yes." The calmness in her voice unsettled him immediately. No apology, no hesitation. Just truth. "You abandoned the palace." "No," Serena corrected evenly. "I stopped exhausting myself for people who stopped noticing." That landed instantly. Kaylor frowned slightly. "That's not fair." Serena tilted her head. "Isn't it?" Silence stretched heavily between them, while waves crashed softly beneath the docks. Villagers nearby noticed the tension quickly and began drifting away discreetly, giving them privacy. Kaylor lowered his voice carefully. "You should have spoken to me first." For the first time, Serena almost smiled. Not warmly, sadly. "I tried for years." The answer struck deeper than anger would have, because somewhere beneath the defensiveness rising inside him, Kaylor knew she was right. Every late-night meeting, she stayed awake, helping him through. Every exhausted expression he ignored because she handled responsibilities without complaint. Every moment he accepted her loyalty, automatically, instead of appreciating it intentionally. Serena stepped around him toward another stack of supplies. Kaylor followed immediately. You disappeared without explanation. No, she answered calmly while lifting another crate. I disappeared without permission. That silenced him completely, because there was a difference, a painful one. Kaylor watched her carefully as she moved through the harbor, helping villagers naturally. People thanked her openly here, smiled when she approached, looked relieved instead of expectant. No one treated her kindness like obligation. And suddenly, Kaylor understood why she stayed. Not because the village needed her more than the palace, because these people noticed her at all. Serena finally looked toward him again, while brushing loose strands of hair away from her face. You know what the strange part is? She asked quietly. Kaylor held her gaze. What? I thought leaving would feel heartbreaking. A pause. Then honestly, but mostly, her eyes drifted briefly toward the ocean behind him. It felt peaceful, and somehow, that hurt the Alpha King more than watching her angry ever could. Kaylor remained in the coastal village longer than intended. At first, he told himself it was temporary, one conversation, an apology. Then he would return to the palace and restore order. But 3 days passed, and somehow, he still couldn't leave, mostly because every hour beside Serena forced him to confront things he never noticed before. The village woke before sunrise each morning. Fishermen repaired damaged nets along the docks, while merchants prepared market stalls beside the harbor road. And every morning, Serena helped all of them, not because anyone expected it, because they appreciated it. Kaylor noticed the difference immediately. Morning, Serena. Thank you again for helping my son yesterday. The medicine worked perfectly. Simple things. Gratitude spoken openly and without hesitation. No one here treated her kindness like something automatically owed to them. One elderly woman even pressed fresh bread into Serena's hands while smiling warmly. You do too much for this village. Serena laughed softly. I'm beginning to think people only like me because I carry heavy things. The old woman scoffed immediately. Nonsense. People like you because you make difficult days easier. Kaylor stood several feet away, hearing every word. And for some reason, that sentence stayed with him. Because inside the palace, Serena made difficult days easier constantly. Yet somehow, no one ever said it aloud, not even him. Later that afternoon, Kaylor found her repairing fishing ropes near the shoreline. You're avoiding the palace intentionally now, he observed. Serena didn't look up from her work. Yes, the direct honesty unsettled him every time. Kaylor stepped closer, slowly. The kingdom still needs you. That finally earned her attention. No, she corrected calmly. The kingdom became dependent on me. Silence settled between them, while ocean wind rolled sharply across the harbor. Kaylor frowned slightly. There's a difference. A massive one. Serena set the ropes aside carefully before continuing. Need implies value exists on both sides. Her eyes met his directly. Dependence only notices people once they stop functioning for others. That answer struck harder than expected, because it sounded painfully true. Kaylor looked toward the crowded harbor quietly. I never meant to make you feel invisible. I know. The immediate response surprised him. Serena sighed softly. That's what makes it worse. Kaylor's expression tightened slightly. You think I never appreciated you? Serena studied him silently for several long seconds, then asked the question he least wanted to answer. Did you? No accusation, no anger, just honesty. And somehow, That made lying impossible. Kaylor opened his mouth once, then stopped, because appreciation suddenly felt difficult to separate from convenience. He trusted Serena completely, relied on her constantly, expected her presence without question. But when was the last time he truly considered what she sacrificed to remain beside him? The silence stretched too long. Serena noticed immediately. "You knew I loved you," she said quietly. "Not a question. A fact." Kaylor looked away briefly. Mistake. Because Serena understood his silence instantly. A faint sadness crossed her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "You did know," Kaylor finally answered carefully. "Yes." The word barely reached above the ocean wind. Serena nodded slowly, like confirmation, hurt less than uncertainty. Then she looked back toward the harbor. "You know what the dangerous part about loving someone silently is?" Kaylor stayed quiet. "They start believing your devotion exists naturally." A pause. Like the tide. Her eyes drifted toward the crashing waves, permanent enough to stop respecting. That landed brutally deep, because suddenly, Kaylor realized something ugly about himself. He had never feared losing Serena before, and because of that, he stopped noticing how much she gave him daily. For years, she loved him quietly beside palace walls, and he responded by assuming she always would. The storm arrived just after midnight. Wind slammed violently against the coastal village, while waves crashed hard enough to shake the wooden docks beneath the harbor houses. Villagers rushed through heavy rain, securing boats and tying down supply crates before the tide rose higher. Kaylor stepped outside the small cabin he'd been staying in and immediately spotted Serena near the shoreline. Of course, she was helping, even during a storm. "Serena!" Rain soaked through her clothes instantly as she turned toward him. "The eastern dock supports are loosening," she shouted over the wind. "If they collapse, half the fishing boats will break free." Several villagers struggled nearby, holding thick rope lines against the violent tide. Kaylor moved toward her immediately. "You should be inside." Serena almost looked offended. "And leave everyone else out here?" Another massive wave crashed against the docks before he could answer. The entire wooden pier groaned dangerously. "Secure the north beams," one fisherman yelled. Kaylor grabbed one of the support ropes without hesitation, while Serena helped villagers drag supply crates away from the collapsing shoreline. Lightning split across the sky overhead. The storm worsened quickly. Then suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the harbor. Kaylor's head snapped toward the sound instantly. One of the massive dock support beams had broken loose completely, and it was falling directly toward Serena. Everything inside him reacted violently. "Serena!" She looked up too late. Kaylor moved before thought existed. His wolf exploded beneath his skin as he lunged across the rain-soaked dock, grabbing Serena hard against his chest, seconds before the collapsing beam crashed where she'd been standing. The impact slammed both of them violently against the harbor rails. Wood splintered everywhere. Serena gasped sharply from the force. Kaylor's arms locked around her immediately. Too tight, too desperate. His wolf roared beneath his skin with terrifying intensity. Mine. The instinct hit so hard, it nearly stole his breath. "Are you hurt?" The question came out rough, raw, nothing like the controlled Alpha King voice he usually carried. Serena blinked up at him, through rainwater and shock. Kaylor barely noticed the villagers rushing around them afterward, because suddenly, all he could think about was how close she came to disappearing forever. His wolf completely lost control. Protective instinct tore violently through his chest, while panic settled somewhere deep and ugly inside him. If he'd been 1 second slower, Kaelor tightened his grip unconsciously. Answer me. Serena stared at him silently for a moment. Then, softly, I'm all right. Relief hit him so powerfully, his knees almost weakened. The realization terrified him. Not because Serena mattered politically, not because the kingdom needed her, because losing her felt unbearable. Kaelor slowly rested his forehead briefly against hers, while rain poured heavily around them. And for the first time in years, Serena heard genuine fear in his voice. Not frustration, not dependence, fear, real fear. You could have been killed, he said quietly. Serena's expression shifted immediately, because after years of loving him silently, she knew the difference between obligation and emotion. This wasn't duty speaking anymore. Kaelor finally pulled back slightly, though his hands still gripped her arms tightly, like releasing her felt impossible. Around them, villagers continued repairing storm damage beneath flashes of lightning, but the world suddenly felt strangely distant. Serena searched his face carefully, and what she found there startled both of them. Panic. The Alpha King looked shaken, not by the storm, by almost losing her. Kaelor seemed to realize it at the exact same moment, because his expression changed sharply afterward, like he finally understood something irreversible. If Serena disappeared now, there would be no palace left worth returning to. And suddenly, the silence he ignored for years became the only thing he could hear. The storm passed before dawn. By sunrise, the village looked exhausted but intact. Damaged boats lined the harbor, while villagers worked quietly through the wreckage left behind by the violent tide. Serena stood near the shoreline, helping organize repair supplies, when Kaelor approached her again. He hadn't slept. She could tell immediately. The Alpha King looked composed on the surface, but tension still lingered heavily beneath his expression. Like his wolf, remained unsettled after the storm. After almost losing her, you should rest, he said quietly. Serena tied another rope around a stack of wood beams. So should you. Kaelor stepped closer, slowly. That wasn't the same. She finally looked at him directly. No. Silence stretched between them, while sea wind rolled softly through the damaged harbor. Kaelor's voice lowered carefully. When that beam collapsed, he stopped briefly. Serena waited, and for once, he didn't retreat from honesty. I thought you were gone. The confession settled heavily in the space between them, because Kaelor Vire rarely admitted fear aloud, especially personal fear. Serena studied him quietly. You've faced wars without looking shaken. Kaelor's jaw tightened slightly. Wars make sense. And this didn't. His silver eyes locked onto hers completely. No. The answer came immediately, truthfully, and somehow that affected Serena more than any grand declaration could have. For years, she loved him in silence, while convincing herself small moments mattered enough. A glance across council rooms, late-night conversations after political disasters, the quiet trust he placed in her judgment. But standing here now, she realized none of those moments compared to seeing Kaelor genuinely terrified at the thought of losing her. Not because she was useful, because she was hers. No, because she was his. The dangerous realization tightened painfully inside her chest. Kaelor exhaled slowly before speaking again. I thought there would always be more time. Serena's expression softened faintly. There it was, the truth, ugly, simple, real. People rarely value permanence until it threatens to disappear. Kaelor looked toward the ocean briefly. You were always beside me, and eventually, you stopped seeing me. The words weren't cruel. That somehow made them hurt more. Kaelor nodded once. Yes. No defense, no excuses, just acceptance. Serena folded her arms lightly against the cool sea wind. For years, I kept waiting for you to notice, without needing to lose me first. Kaylor's gaze returned to her immediately. I did notice you. She almost laughed. Kaylor, the entire palace noticed me. A painful silence followed. Noticed isn't the same as valuing. That landed directly where it needed to. Kaylor stepped closer, carefully. Rainwater still stained parts of the dock beneath their feet, while villagers worked quietly in the distance. I valued you, he said softly. Serena held his gaze steadily. You valued what I gave you. The distinction shattered whatever defense remained inside him, because she was right. Again, Kaylor spent years loving her presence without questioning what carrying everyone else's burdens cost her personally. And somehow, he convinced himself loyalty meant she needed nothing in return. He reached toward her slowly before stopping halfway. Not touching, waiting. A choice. For the first time since she met him, Kaylor looked uncertain around her. Not because he lacked power, because he finally understood he might not deserve her trust anymore. I don't know how to fix years of taking you for granted, he admitted quietly. Serena looked at him for a long moment, then finally answered honestly, You probably can't. The truth hurt visibly, but she continued anyway. That doesn't mean you stop trying. Something shifted inside Kaylor's expression then. Not relief, determination, and for the first time in years, the Alpha King chose to stay beside her without expecting forgiveness to arrive automatically. Kaylor should have returned to the capital days ago. The palace sent reports constantly now. Trade disputes, council instability, border tensions. Every message ended the same way. The kingdom requires your return immediately. Kaylor ignored most of them. For the first time in years, someone else could handle the kingdom. That realization alone felt strange, because Serena had spent years ensuring he never carried responsibilities alone. Now he finally understood how heavy everything became without her. And instead of ordering her back, he stayed. The coastal villagers found the situation endlessly amusing. The Alpha King can fight wars, one fisherman muttered loudly, but apparently loses battles against fishing nets. Several workers burst into laughter immediately. Kaylor stared down at the tangled ropes in his hands with visible irritation. These knots make no logical sense. That's because you're pulling them wrong. Serena stepped beside him, calmly, before fixing the entire mess within seconds. The fisherman laughed harder afterward. Kaylor narrowed his eyes slightly. You all seem very entertained by this. One older villager grinned shamelessly. Watching royalty suffer builds community spirit. Even Serena laughed quietly at that. Kaylor noticed immediately. Not the joke, her. The way her shoulders relaxed here. The way she smiled more often without realizing it. The way people spoke to her, like a person, instead of a solution. And slowly, Kaylor began understanding how lonely palace life must have felt for her. No one there ever asked if she was tired. They only asked if something was finished. Later that afternoon, Kaylor helped repair broken dock beams beneath the warm coastal sun, while villagers carried supplies around them. His shirt sleeves were rolled carelessly to his elbows now, exposing old battle scars most nobles rarely saw. Serena approached, carrying water buckets before stopping beside him. You're terrible with tools. Kaylor looked offended. I led military campaigns across 4 territories. And yet, that hammer nearly became a public safety issue. A faint smile tugged at his mouth despite himself. Dangerous woman. Serena froze slightly after realizing she'd teased him so naturally, because years inside the palace trained her to stay careful around powerful men. Kaylor noticed the hesitation instantly. "You don't have to measure every word around me anymore." The quiet gentleness behind the statement unsettled her unexpectedly, because he meant it. Kaylor set the hammer aside before looking toward the harbor thoughtfully. "I spent years assuming your loyalty meant you were happy beside me." Serena leaned lightly against the unfinished dock rail. "I spent years pretending exhaustion was the same thing as happiness." The honesty between them no longer felt sharp, just real. Kaylor glanced sideways toward her. "You know what bothers me most?" "What?" "That villagers who met you 2 weeks ago appreciate you more openly than I did after years." Serena looked down briefly. "People rarely notice silent devotion until it disappears." Kaylor's expression tightened. "I'm noticing now." She met his gaze carefully. "Yes," she said softly, "you are." And somehow, that mattered more than anger ever would have. By evening, the repaired docks stood stronger against the tide, while villagers celebrated quietly around lantern fires near the shoreline. Kaylor sat beside Serena, watching waves crash softly beneath moonlight. No council, no war meetings, no expectations, just silence shared willingly. For years, Serena stood beside the Alpha King because duty demanded it. Now, Kaylor remained beside her simply because he wanted to, and slowly, dangerously slowly, Serena began noticing something she never expected. The man beside her wasn't trying to convince her to return. He was trying to become someone worth returning for. The village stopped treating Kaylor like a temporary visitor after the 3rd week. By then, the fishermen already complained when he arrived late to morning dock repairs, and children followed him openly through the harbor, asking endless questions about wolves and battle scars. To everyone's amusement, the Alpha King answered most of them seriously. Serena watched the transformation quietly. The man who once carried entire kingdoms on his shoulders now spent afternoons repairing nets and carrying fish crates beside ordinary villagers without complaint, not because he needed praise, because he genuinely wanted to stay. That difference mattered. One evening, Serena returned from the market, carrying fresh bread and medicine herbs, only to pause outside her small cottage. Flowers rested carefully near the doorway. Wild coastal lilies, her favorite. She stared at them for several seconds before hearing Kaylor's voice behind her. "The old woman near the cliffs said you liked those." Serena turned slowly. "You ask people about my favorite flowers?" Kaylor looked almost defensive suddenly. "That seems like information I should have known years ago." Something warm and painful twisted unexpectedly inside her chest, because for years she loved him through grand responsibilities and exhausting sacrifices. Yet somehow, this small gesture affected her more than political speeches ever could. Serena picked up the flowers carefully. "You're trying very hard." Kaylor stepped closer, slowly. "I should have tried sooner." The honesty in his voice remained dangerous. Not polished, not royal, real. That made it difficult to protect herself properly around him anymore. They walked together toward the shoreline. Afterward, while evening waves rolled softly beneath fading gold light, Kaylor carried the market baskets before Serena could argue. Again, another small thing, another quiet act of care. "You know," Serena said lightly, "watching the Alpha King carry vegetables through a fishing village would probably destroy your council politically." Kaylor glanced sideways toward her. "Good." The answer startled a laugh from her immediately. Kaylor looked at her the moment it happened, like he still couldn't believe hearing it. You smile more here, he said quietly. Serena's expression softened faintly. I breathe more here. Silence followed, but not uncomfortable silence anymore. The kind that settled naturally between two people slowly learning each other again, outside obligation. Kaylor stopped walking near the shoreline. Moonlight reflected softly across the ocean behind him, while sea wind moved through his dark hair. Then, quietly, carefully, he finally said the thing lingering between them for weeks. I loved your loyalty before I understood your worth. Serena froze, because no one had ever admitted something that honest to her before. Kaylor looked away briefly toward the water. I thought trust meant permanence, he continued quietly. I never realized how unfair it was, expecting you to stay, simply because you always had. Emotion tightened painfully inside Serena's chest. For years, she begged silently for this moment, for acknowledgement, for understanding, and now that it finally existed, it felt heavier than expected. Kaylor stepped closer, slowly. Not demanding, never demanding any more. I don't expect forgiveness, because I finally noticed, he said. I know I have to earn it. Serena searched his face carefully beneath the moonlight, and for the first time, she believed him completely. Not because he promised change, because he already changed without knowing if she'd stay. That mattered, dangerously. Kaylor reached toward her carefully, before brushing wind-blown hair gently away from her face. The touch remained soft, patient, nothing like assumption. Serena's breath caught slightly, because suddenly she realized something terrifying. The Alpha King no longer feared losing her position in his life. He feared losing her entirely. And somehow, that finally taught him how to love her properly. The shoreline glowed silver beneath the full moon. Waves rolled softly against the docks, while lantern lights flickered warmly across the quiet coastal village behind them. For the first time in years, Serena felt no urgency pulling at her chest, no unfinished schedules waiting beside her bed, no palace servants demanding answers, no exhausting need to hold entire systems together before they collapsed. Just peace, and beside her, Kaylor. They walked slowly along the water's edge in comfortable silence while cool sea wind moved around them. Weeks ago, Serena would have thought this impossible, the Alpha King staying willingly beside her without war, duty, or obligation forcing it. Yet somehow, here he was. No crown, no royal escort, just a man who finally understood what it meant to lose something valuable. Kaylor glanced sideways toward her. You've been quiet tonight. Serena smiled faintly. I was thinking. Dangerous activity. She laughed softly under her breath. The sound still affected him every time. She noticed. That, too, felt different now. Before, Kaylor accepted her presence automatically. Now, he paid attention to every small thing she offered willingly. They stopped near the old wooden pier, where moonlight shimmered across dark water beneath them. Kaylor rested his forearms lightly against the railing. The council sent another message today. Serena looked toward him carefully. Demanding your return? Yes. And? Kaylor's silver eyes met hers steadily. I ignored it. Something warm flickered unexpectedly inside her chest. Not because he abandoned responsibility for her. Because for once, he chose what mattered emotionally instead of politically. The old Kaylor would never have done that. Serena looked back toward the ocean. You still haven't asked me to come back. The silence after her words felt important somehow. Kaylor answered slowly. Because I don't want you returning out of obligation. Her breath caught slightly. For years, obligation defined everything between them. Her loyalty, her silence, her love. But now, Kaylor finally understood the difference between devotion freely given and devotion expected endlessly. He turned toward her fully. "I want you to choose it." The honesty in his voice settled deep inside her chest. No command, no assumption, a choice. Something he should have offered her years ago. Serena studied him quietly beneath the moonlight. The Alpha King looked different now, not weaker, softer in places power never touched before. Like loving someone properly had humbled him in ways war never could. "You know what the strangest part is?" she asked softly. Kaylor waited patiently. "I spent years believing loving you quietly was enough." A pause. But silence only works when someone cares enough to listen carefully. Kaylor's expression tightened painfully. "I'm listening now." "Yes," Serena whispered. "You are." And for the first time, she truly believed it. The ocean wind carried soft salt air around them, while distant village lanterns flickered behind the shoreline. Kaylor stepped closer carefully before reaching for her hand. Not assuming, asking silently. Serena looked down briefly at his outstretched hand, then placed hers into it willingly. Choice. Not duty, not exhaustion. Choice. Kaylor's fingers tightened gently around hers, while relief crossed his face so openly it almost hurt to see. Because now she understood something, too. The Alpha King never truly learned her value, while she stayed endlessly beside him. He learned it the moment she proved she could survive happily without him. And maybe that was the cruelest lesson about quiet love. The people who love you silently are often noticed only after they finally learn how to leave. But tonight, standing beneath moonlight beside the man who finally saw her completely, Serena realized something beautiful. This time, Kaylor wasn't holding on to her because she stayed. He was loving her carefully enough that she wanted to.